Time for top story now then, and as the violence continues to escalate in Syria, rebels face severe criticism for what appears to be their brutal summary execution of suspected pro-government gunmen on the streets of Aleppo. Now, the shootings were recorded and then uploaded onto the internet, but opposition leaders also said that they'd found dozens of bodies in a suburb of Damascus in the aftermath of the Syrian army's house-to-house search for rebel fighters. For more on this, I'm joined by International Affairs editor Annette Young. Annette, it does seem we've entered a bit of a new phase, doesn't it, in this 17-month-old uprising?
It certainly does, and as we know, Stuart, war is ugly. Now, Aleppo, for much of the uprising, has been relatively stable, and now it's becoming the location of the most vicious fighting we've seen since this uprising began. Now, for 2 weeks, Syrian army have been battling rebel troops on the streets of Aleppo, and for the first time the United Nations has confirmed that the Syrian government has been using jet fighters in its arsenal of heavy weapons, which of course is targeting and aimed at crushing the opposition. Let's just take a listen to what the UN spokesperson for the observers mission on the ground had to say about the situation.
The opposition is in possession of heavy weapons, including tanks. The situation that concerns us the most is the situation of civilians. There are some civilians who are trapped in the crossfire. Yeah. Yesterday, for the first time, our observers saw firing from a fighter aircraft.
And of course, what she was saying there, Stuart, is that the opposition is also in possession of a heavy arsenal as well. And it's against this backdrop that this video appeared in the last 24 hours. It's a pretty nasty video, and it shows basically what looks like vigilante justice on the part of rebel fighters. We see 4 apparent Assad loyalists executed by rebels in Aleppo. They're lined up against the wall and shot dead by Kalashnikov rifles. Now, one of those who was killed has been identified as Al-Zanadin al-Berri, who's also commonly referred to as Zeno. He's known as a leader of the Shabiha militia group, who apparently has been accused of killing 15 rebel fighters the day before during a truce in Aleppo. Now, these executions, not surprisingly and very sadly, of course, attracted hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube and also led to the Russians, of course, which is the Syrian government's most important foreign backer, saying that this is evidence of brutality on both sides.
I was to say, I mean, it does reveal, doesn't it, suspected war crimes potentially being carried out by both sides.
It certainly does. And as the rebels gain the upper hand in Syrian cities and towns and villages, the opportunity for revenge is hard to ignore, obviously. Now, Human Rights Watch has declared this as a war crime. Let's just take a listen to what the pro-rebel group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, that we rely on a lot for the sort of, video evidence, what they had to say about this particular incident.
Under no law, international law or Islamic law, should anyone execute a prisoner. This is criminal. This is revenge.
Now, obviously in the last 17 months, government forces and the Shabiha, the pro-Assad militia groups, have been accused of perpetrating horrendous, much more such abuses, and worse, the cold-blooded slaying of women and children. But, clearly neither side has a monopoly of righteousness nor of abuse.
Now, one difference, of course, is that in Libya, we're used to international agencies being able to gather evidence very, very quickly on the ground. Is that the same in Syria?
No. And, the problem is there's basically one word that sums it up. It's called access. The reality is that, in Libya, some international agencies were able to get very quickly onto the ground and try and sort of establish what happened, because the most important thing is to gain evidence from witnesses, and time is of the essence. Now, of course, in Syria, accessing the country in the last 17 months has been virtually impossible. And effectively, as the International Red Cross has said, this is war, and as a result, international humanitarian law now applies to Syria. That means that those combatants who are obliged to obey the laws of war, and those guilty of abuses could find themselves in front of the International Criminal Court. Let's not forget, Syria, among every other country, has signed up to the Geneva convention. So, the reality is for both sides is that they could both find themselves standing in front of a tribunal at The Hague at some point in time.
Annette Young, our International Affairs editor today here on France 24. Thanks very much. That was today's top story. Do stay tuned.